The first time I told another man Leah Carter was with me, she was standing 3 feet away and had given me absolutely no permission to say it. I had just pushed through the glass door of our apartment building with a takeout bag in one hand when I saw her near the mailboxes, shoulders squared, keys already in her palm. The man in front of her was doing most of the talking. "I'm asking for 10 minutes, Leah." "That's not unreasonable," she answered without raising her voice. "I already gave you my answer, Dylan." He shifted when she tried to move around him, not enough to touch her. Just enough to make it clear he expected the conversation to continue because he wanted it to. Leah noticed me over his shoulder, and for 1 second our eyes met. She didn't ask me to rescue her. She just looked annoyed enough that I knew staying out of it would mean pretending I hadn't understood. My name is Evan Brooks, and at 30 I had gotten pretty good at choosing my words before creating problems with them. That habit failed me completely. I walked over, stopped beside Leah rather than between them, and said, "Everything okay?" Dylan turned toward me with the immediate irritation of a man discovering there was now a witness. Leah said, "It was about to be," which told me more than a 5-minute explanation would have. Dylan gave a humorless laugh and said they were having a private conversation. I looked at Leah instead of him. "You ready to go?" She understood the question immediately and nodded. Dylan stared between us. "Who is this?" I should have said neighbor. Friend would have been slightly dishonest but defensible. Instead, I heard myself say, "She's with me." Silence lasted maybe 2 seconds, which was long enough for me to reconsider every decision that had brought me into the lobby. Dylan's eyebrows lifted. "She's with you?" I opened my mouth, already preparing the responsible correction, but Leah moved first. She stepped closer until her shoulder touched my arm, looked up at me with a smile I had seen plenty of times across the hallway, but never aimed at me like that, and said quietly, "Don't make me correct you." There was amusement in her voice, but not enough for me to hide behind. Then she turned back to Dylan. "We're done. I meant it when I said it before, and I mean it now. Please stop coming here to discuss whether I'm allowed to be finished." That took the usefulness out of anything I could have added. Dylan muttered something about her moving on quickly, but Leah only reached for the lobby door and held it open for him. He finally left, and she waited until he was halfway across the parking lot before letting the door swing shut. I looked at her. She looked at me. Then she glanced deliberately at the small amount of space still separating our arms and said, "Well, boyfriend, that was efficient." I rubbed the back of my neck. I was going to say neighbor. Terrible instinct. Friend? Weak. Acquaintance who occasionally steals my laundry machine? She finally laughed, and some of the tension went out of her shoulders. I had known Leah for 11 months, mostly through hallway conversations, borrowed tools, misdelivered packages, and the fact that we both seemed to leave for work at nearly the same time. She was 29, worked as an event florist, and could turn almost anything into a joke without ever sounding like she was begging people to laugh. I liked that about her more than was convenient. I also liked the way she remembered which mornings I had early meetings, and somehow always managed to be coming downstairs with an extra coffee on those days. None of that gave me the right to turn one uncomfortable encounter with her ex into a romantic claim. "So," I said as we headed toward the elevator, "for the record, that was tactical." Leah pressed the button and looked at me from the corner of her eye. Which part? The with me part. Interesting. I didn't want him thinking I was my boyfriend, assuming things. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped inside before turning to face me. "Evan, you said I was with you. I stood next to you." Dylan left. Nobody died. That's a very low standard for successful dating. Who said we were dating? She waited just long enough to enjoy what that did to my face. "You're the one obsessed with terminology." I followed her into the elevator. "I'm saying I don't want you thinking I'm taking advantage of a bad situation." Her expression changed then, the teasing easing without disappearing completely. "And I'm saying Dylan doesn't get to turn every decision I make afterward into a reaction to him." That landed harder than I expected. I knew enough about their breakup to know it had ended a month earlier, and Leah had never once talked about getting him back, punishing him, or proving anything. Still, I had apparently managed to make him the center of a conversation after he had already left. "Fair," I said. Leah nodded once. "Good." When we reached our floor, we walked down the hall together. My apartment was 4C. Hers was 4A, 2 doors away. Close enough that I knew when she was playing music while arranging flowers at home, and she knew exactly when I ruined toast. At her door, I stopped and tried one last time to restore normal proportions to the evening. So we agree I'm not actually your boyfriend because of one sentence in a lobby. Leah unlocked her door, but didn't open it, do we, Leah? She turned, leaning lightly against the frame. You really hate unanswered questions, don't you? I design traffic systems for a living. Unanswered questions become six-car pileups. Her smile returned. I'm beginning to understand you. That makes one of us. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she said, I'm getting coffee at Marlowe's tomorrow morning, 7:30. We had both been going to that coffee shop for months, sometimes separately, sometimes accidentally together, but she had never announced her schedule like an invitation. Okay, I said. Leah opened her door. You can come if you want. I nodded. And she added, assuming you plan to keep being with me. Before I could find a response that didn't sound either terrified or too pleased, she stepped inside and closed the door with a soft click. I stood in the hallway staring at the number on her door for several seconds longer than any functioning adult should. The sensible explanation was that Leah had enjoyed turning my accidental line back on me. She enjoyed getting a reaction out of me, and I had apparently handed her enough material to survive the month. But there was another possibility, one I had carefully avoided for almost a year, because liking your neighbor was manageable, right up until you discovered she liked you back. The next morning, no ex would be standing in the lobby. Nobody would need protecting, and Leah would have absolutely no reason to pretend I was anything except the man who lived 2 doors down. At 7:25, I was already putting on my shoes. At 7:29, I walked into Marlowe's trying very hard to look like a man who had not spent the previous 4 minutes outside, deciding whether arriving early would seem eager. Leah was already at the small table by the window, one ankle tucked behind the other, 2 coffees in front of her. She looked up as I approached and pushed 1 cup across the table without asking what I wanted. Black, 1 sugar, she said. Apparently girlfriends are efficient. I sat down slowly. You're enjoying this. Immensely. I picked up the cup and checked it as if she might have poisoned it. For accuracy, this is exactly how I take it. Leah lifted her own drink. I've lived near you for almost a year, Evan. You order the same thing every morning like caffeine is a municipal regulation. Consistency prevents collapse. That explains so much about you. She smiled into her cup, and whatever excuse I had prepared about last night disappeared before I could use it. Nothing dramatic happened at breakfast. That was the problem. Dylan was nowhere around. Leah did not need me to sit beside her, carry anything, pretend anything, or make anyone jealous. She still stayed for nearly 40 minutes. Asked about a transportation proposal I had complained about once in the elevator, and remembered that I had a meeting with the city council that afternoon. When we stood to leave, she reached for the sleeve of my jacket before I stepped into the path of a server carrying a tray. Her hand stayed there for a second longer than necessary. Careful, boyfriend, she said. Hot coffee. I looked at her fingers on my arm. Does this count as workplace safety? No. This is me preventing paperwork. Then she let go and headed toward the door while I stood there, realizing I had learned absolutely nothing except that I wanted her to touch me again. Over the next few days, our building developed what I privately considered a Leah problem. She started waiting by the elevator when she heard my door close. She knocked Wednesday evening holding a bowl of leftover pasta and said she had cooked too much, even though the portion she handed me looked suspiciously intentional. Thursday, I found her in the courtyard reading on the bench where I usually sat after work. There were 3 empty seats nearby. She patted the space beside her without looking up. Don't make this weird. I sat down. You selected the seat and already regret it. You could move, you could stop talking. She made it through another page before asking how my meeting had gone, and when I answered, she closed the book completely. That was Leah's real problem. She could act casual while paying attention in a way that made casual feel dishonest. I tried not to turn every gesture into evidence. That lasted until Friday morning at Marlowe's, when Claire, one of the baristas who had seen us there separately for months, set Leah's latte on the counter and said, "Your boyfriend already grabbed you a table." I was standing 6 feet away with my coffee and immediately opened my mouth. Leah beat me to it. Evan has a complicated relationship with accurate terminology. Claire glanced between us and laughed. That sounds exhausting. You have no idea, Leah said. She walked over, sat across from me, and began adding cinnamon to her drink as if nothing important had happened. I waited until Claire moved away. You could have corrected her. Leah looked up. I could have. You didn't. Excellent observation. City planning has really sharpened you. I leaned back. Can I ask something without you turning it into a courtroom? No promises. Are you keeping this going because you think Dylan might show up again? The change in her face was immediate. Not hurt exactly. More like I had asked a question she had hoped I was smarter than. She set down the cinnamon shaker. No, okay, actually not okay. Why would Dylan get that much influence over what I do now? I'm not saying he should. Then stop making him the explanation. Her voice stayed quiet, which somehow made the point sharper. I ended that relationship because I was tired of negotiating basic things I had already decided. If I sit with you, that's because I want to sit with you. If I bring you food, it's because I wanted to knock on your door. If I let Claire call you my boyfriend, maybe it's because I didn't hate hearing it. She paused, then added, none of those decisions belong to Dylan. I deserve that. You're right. Leah studied me, probably checking whether I meant it. That was fast. I can be corrected. You seem emotionally attached to it. Occupational hazard. Her mouth twitched. The tension eased, but only slightly. I looked at her and decided that if I asked another vague question, she might throw cinnamon at me. Then what are you doing Saturday? I said. Leah blinked. I'm going to the Hawthorne Street Market. Alone? Usually. Can I come? Her expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. You want to? Yes. No emergency? None planned. No ex nearby, God willing. No terminology crisis. I can survive one afternoon. She smiled then, slow and pleased. Come with me. I should have stopped there. Instead, I heard myself ask, is it a date? Leah stared at me for 1 second, and then laughed hard enough that the woman at the next table glanced over. You really cannot help yourself. It's a reasonable question. Is it? You invited me somewhere you usually go alone. Technically, you invited yourself. You said yes. Dangerously strong evidence. I narrowed my eyes. Leah. She leaned forward over the table, amusement still bright in her face. Come Saturday, Evan. Wear comfortable shoes. Try not to bring a questionnaire. That is not an answer. Exactly. For the rest of the day, I told myself she was being difficult because she enjoyed watching me overthink things. That was true. It just was not the whole truth anymore. By Saturday morning, Dylan had been absent from our lives for more than a week. Leah had created half a dozen reasons to spend time with me, and I had finally run out of practical explanations for all of them. At 10:15, I stood outside her door while she locked it behind her, wearing jeans, a light jacket, and the kind of smile that told me she knew exactly what question I was carrying. She slipped her phone into her bag and started toward the stairs. Ready? She asked. I followed her. For the first time since the lobby, I was no longer trying to figure out whether Leah was interested. I was beginning to suspect Saturday would force me to decide what I was going to do about it. Hawthorne Street Market took over 3 blocks every Saturday, which meant food carts, handmade jewelry, flower stalls Leah pretended not to evaluate professionally, and enough people packed between the booths to make walking in a straight line impossible. Leah moved through it like she had been coming there her whole life. She knew which bakery sold out first, which vendor overpriced candles, and which coffee stand had learned not to argue when she asked for extra cinnamon. I followed beside her, trying not to turn the morning into an interrogation. She noticed immediately. You're very quiet, she said, as we stopped near a stand selling fresh bread. I was told not to bring a questionnaire. I said try. I'm respecting boundaries. That sounds suspiciously like sulking. I bought a loaf neither of us needed and told her I was adapting. She smiled like she had already won something. The strange part was how quickly the morning stopped feeling like an experiment. We shared a paper tray of dumplings because Leah insisted buying 2 portions would be an irresponsible rejection of efficiency. She stole the crispest one from my side and argued that anything placed in the center became communal property. 10 minutes later, she remembered I hated overly sweet coffee and switched our cups after realizing the vendor had mixed up the orders. None of it was dramatic. That was what made it harder to dismiss. We had spent months learning small things about each other accidentally. Now Leah was paying attention on purpose, and I was doing the same. When she stopped at a florist's stall, she automatically reached to straighten a crooked display, then caught herself. Don't, I said. You're off duty. She looked offended. That arrangement is leaning. It's surviving. Barely. You rescue flowers. I apparently rescue terminology. She pointed at me. See? This is why I keep you around. Near noon, the crowd thickened around the food trucks, and Leah reached for my hand as we squeezed between 2 groups of people. I assumed it was practical until we cleared the bottleneck, and she did not let go. Her fingers stayed threaded through mine while we walked another half block. I looked down once, then at her. We're out of the crowd. Excellent situational awareness. Leah. She kept facing forward, but I could see the corner of her mouth lifting. Do you want to file an objection? I'm reviewing the evidence. She finally looked at me. You know what your problem is? Several departments have submitted reports. You think if you analyze something long enough, eventually it stops being risky. I could have made a joke. Instead, I tightened my hand around hers. And you think if you joke about something long enough, eventually you won't have to say it directly. Her eyebrows lifted. That was annoyingly competent. Occupational hazard. She squeezed my hand once and did not let go. We found 2 seats on the low brick wall beside a small park at the end of the market. Leah had bought lemonade. I had somehow acquired a bag of pastries and a jar of hot sauce I did not remember agreeing to purchase. We sat close enough that our knees touched whenever either of us moved. She took one of the pastries, tore it in half, and handed me the larger piece without comment. I watched her for a second and finally decided I was done pretending my question was complicated. Do you want this to be a date? I asked. Leah stopped chewing. She looked at me as if she was checking whether there was another clause coming. Yes. The answer was immediate. I felt something in my chest loosen and tighten at the same time. Leah swallowed, then added, I thought I had been making that fairly obvious. You have. And yet here we are. I wanted to hear you say it. She studied me, not angry, just curious. Why? I looked down at our joined hands. Because I don't want to build something real on an assumption I made when you were trying to get rid of your ex. For once, Leah did not answer with a joke right away. She turned slightly toward me. Then hear this part clearly. Dylan has nothing to do with why I'm sitting here. I nodded. Okay, and I have been interested in you since before that lobby. That one hit harder. How long before? Her smile returned, smaller this time. You're not getting a timeline. That seems unfair. You'll survive. I need data. You need hobbies. I laughed and she leaned closer, still holding my hand. The humor took the pressure off without erasing what she had just said. I realized then that I had spent the entire week waiting for enough evidence to prove something Leah had already decided. The kiss happened 5 minutes later, and for once I did not let circumstances make the choice for me. We had started walking again when Leah stopped beside a mural painted across the side of an old bookstore. She was telling me why one of the market vendors had no understanding of color balance, and I realized I had stopped listening because I was watching her mouth. Leah noticed. Of course she did. You're doing that thing, she said. What thing? Thinking very loudly. I took a breath. Can I kiss you? Her expression softened immediately. See? That wasn't difficult. You haven't answered. Yes, Evan. She stepped closer. You can kiss me. I did. And the first thing I learned was that all our teasing had been hiding a surprising amount of restraint. Leah's hand came up to the front of my jacket, not pulling me closer at first, just resting there. The kiss was warm and brief, long enough to remove every remaining question about attraction, and short enough that when we separated, I could see her trying not to look too pleased. Does that count? She asked. I laughed against her forehead. I hate you. No, you don't. Increasingly difficult to argue. She kissed me again before I could say anything else, this time because she wanted to, and that was enough to retire the question I had carried since the lobby. Leah wanted me. I wanted her. Neither of us could honestly pretend otherwise anymore. The problem showed up that evening because I apparently could not leave well enough alone. We were back in the apartment lobby when Mrs. Delgado from the second floor came through carrying 2 grocery bags. She saw Leah's hand in mine and smiled. Finally, she said, so you two are official now. Leah looked at me, amused. I should have answered simply. Instead, accuracy attacked. We're seeing where this goes, I said. Mrs. Delgado nodded and kept walking, but Leah's hand loosened in mine. She waited until the elevator doors closed before saying, seeing where this goes? I heard the difference in her voice immediately. I didn't mean that badly. I know. We had 1 date. Also true. She looked at the elevator numbers instead of me. I'm not asking you to plan our retirement. I turned toward her. Then what are you asking? Leah finally looked at me. Nothing right now. That's kind of the point. The elevator opened on our floor and we stepped out together. She did not storm away or turn cold. She simply stopped outside her door and faced me. I'm okay going slowly, Evan. I'm not okay spending the next month proving that I mean every choice I already made. I started to explain, but she raised one hand. You wanted me to be clear. I was clear today. So now I'm going to stop doing all the work. There was no anger in it, which somehow made the words harder to avoid. If you want coffee with me, ask. If you want another date, ask. If you want to kiss me again, I strongly recommend asking. Her smile returned for half a second. But I'm done leaving breadcrumbs so you can conduct a field study. I should have argued that I had initiated things too. Instead, I thought about the past week and realized how many openings Leah had created for me. The coffee, the courtyard seat, the market, her hand in mine. Even after I had said the first dangerous thing in the lobby, she had been the one repeatedly making sure I knew I was allowed to mean it. "That's fair," I said. Leah nodded. "Good." She unlocked her door, then looked back at me. There was warmth in her face, but she did not rescue me from the moment with another invitation. "Good night, Evan. Good night, Leah." The next morning I opened my door at the usual time and found her coming down the hall. She smiled. "Morning, morning." She kept walking. No extra coffee in her hand, no pause by the elevator, no girlfriend joke, no convenient little challenge waiting for me to answer. She was not punishing me. That was the uncomfortable part. She had simply stopped carrying the momentum for both of us. As I watched the elevator doors close behind her, I finally understood that I had already gotten the answer I kept asking for. Leah wanted me. The next question belonged entirely to me. The first thing I learned after Leah stopped leaving me openings was that I had become embarrassingly dependent on them. For almost a year, seeing her had felt accidental. Then for 1 week, it had become easy because she was always somehow already there, holding an extra coffee, saving me a seat, knocking on my door with an excuse neither of us believed. When that stopped, nothing between us became hostile. She still smiled when we crossed paths. She still asked how my day went. Tuesday evening, she even stood beside me in the elevator and made fun of the fact that I had bought exactly the same frozen dinner 3 weeks in a row. But she did not linger outside my door afterward. She did not suggest coffee. She did not give me another playful label to argue with. Leah had not withdrawn from me. She had simply stopped doing my half. By Wednesday, I was irritated enough with myself to stop pretending I needed more information. I got home a little after 6, changed out of my work clothes, then stood in my kitchen for maybe 30 seconds, trying to invent a practical reason to knock on her door. That was when I realized the entire point was not having one. So I walked down the hall and knocked anyway. Leah opened wearing jeans and an old gray sweatshirt, her hair clipped up badly enough that several pieces had escaped around her face. She looked surprised to see me. "Emergency?" she asked. "No." "Package delivered incorrectly?" "No." "Municipal crisis?" "Contained." Her mouth started to curve. I said, "Dinner Friday with me, I'm asking." The smile finished forming. "Look at you. Please don't make this educational." "I would never." She folded her arms. "Where?" "There's a little Mediterranean place on Foster. 7:30. "You made a reservation?" "Yesterday." That got a genuine laugh out of her. "So you planned this before knocking." "I'm reckless in controlled environments." Leah leaned against the doorframe and studied me just long enough to make my pulse noticeably less cooperative. "Yes," she said. "I'd like dinner Friday." Friday was easier because I stopped pretending I did not know what I wanted from the evening. I picked Leah up at her door, even though the restaurant was close enough that we could have met downstairs. I told her she looked beautiful, instead of editing it into something safer. At dinner, when she reached across the table to steal one of my roasted potatoes, I caught her wrist lightly and told her to order her own. She took the potato anyway and said my sudden confidence was becoming inconvenient. "You requested initiative," I reminded her. "I requested initiative, not territorial food policy. Boundaries matter." "You're learning all the wrong lessons." The important difference was that I was no longer waiting for her to create the next romantic moment. I asked if she wanted to walk after dinner. I reached for her hand first. When we stopped outside a bookstore she liked, I kissed her because I wanted to, and because she leaned toward me before I even finished asking. That became our new rhythm over the next several days. I invited her for coffee instead of hoping she would appear. I brought dinner to her apartment one evening because she had spent 12 hours setting up flowers for a hotel reception, and I stayed only after she told me she wanted company. None of those things were grand enough to impress anyone watching from outside. They mattered because they were choices I was finally making before Leah made them easy for me. She noticed, of course. She noticed everything. Sunday morning, while we were waiting for the elevator, she looked at the coffee in her hand and then at me. "You ordered this correctly. Try to contain your excitement. And you knocked on my door before 7:30. You were awake. That is not the point." I smiled. "Does this count?" Leah groaned and bumped her shoulder into mine. "Don't ruin your progress." The larger test came that afternoon in the courtyard. Mrs. Delgado was watering the planter boxes while Leah and I sat on the low wall with our coffees. She glanced over and said, "You two still figuring things out?" There was no pressure in the question, just curiosity. Leah did not look at me this time. She kept watching Mrs. Delgado attack a basil plant with far too much water. A week earlier, I would have qualified the answer until it became technically meaningless. This time I said, "We're dating." Mrs. Delgado smiled, as if she had been waiting for me to catch up with the rest of the building. Good. Took long enough. Leah waited until the courtyard door closed behind her before turning toward me. Dating? Accurate terminology. I'm proud of you. I've been studying. She smiled, but there was something thoughtful underneath it. That evening we ended up at Leah's kitchen table eating leftover takeout while she trimmed stems from flowers she had brought home from an event. It was one of those quiet stretches that would have looked boring to anybody else, and somehow felt more intimate than half the dates I had been on in my life. She slid a short stem into a glass of water and said, "You know I never needed you to announce anything to the building." "I know." "Do you?" I looked at her. Leah set down the scissors. "I liked hearing you say we were dating today, but that isn't what I was asking for before." I waited instead of defending myself. She continued, "I just didn't want to keep making every first move while you stood there deciding whether I had provided enough evidence." "I know that now." She gave me a look. Dangerous sentence. Let me finish. I leaned back in the chair. I kept thinking being careful was the respectful thing. Part of it was. I didn't want to take what happened with Dylan and turn it into permission you hadn't given me. Leah nodded. That part I understood. But after you gave me permission, I kept waiting anyway. I rubbed my thumb along the edge of the takeout container. That wasn't respect anymore. That was me wanting certainty before I had to risk anything. Leah was quiet for a moment, then said, "That sounds more accurate. Please appreciate how painful it is for me to admit you were right. I'll treasure it privately." I laughed, but what she had said stayed with me. We had already kissed, we were dating. She had told me directly that she wanted me. I had started initiating instead of waiting. Yet there was still one sentence I had never actually said to her, because circumstances had said it first. In the lobby I had told another man, "She's with me," and Leah had allowed it. Every romantic movement since then had grown out of that moment, but the sentence itself was still backwards. It described Leah as if I had already been entitled to an answer I had never asked her for. When we left her apartment later that night, Leah walked with me toward my door even though hers was behind us. I stopped midway down the hallway. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. I was not ready to do it there." The thought needed to be cleaner than another spontaneous line beside two apartment doors. I kissed her goodnight instead and went inside with a decision already made. The following evening, we came back from coffee together and crossed the lobby toward the elevators. Leah was telling me about a bride who had changed her bouquet colors 4 times when I stopped near the mailboxes. She took 2 more steps before noticing I was no longer beside her. "Even?" I looked at the exact stretch of floor where Dylan had stood the night this started, then back at Leah. No ex, no audience, no reason to perform anything. "Wait a second," I said. Her expression changed when she saw my face, and for once there was no teasing in it. She turned fully toward me and waited. Leah turned fully toward me and waited, one hand still wrapped around the paper cup she had been carrying from the coffee shop. The lobby looked exactly the same as it had the night Dylan showed up. The same mailboxes, the same scratched tile, the same ridiculous plant near the window that somehow survived despite nobody admitting responsibility for watering it. The only thing missing was the pressure. No one was blocking Leah's path. No one was asking her to explain herself. For the first time since I had said she was with me, there was absolutely nothing forcing either of us to choose a particular answer. I walked back toward her and said, "I need to correct something." Her eyebrows lifted. "That sounds ominous coming from you. Probably because I've built a reputation, a terrible one." She smiled, but I saw a little uncertainty behind it now. "What are you correcting?" I stopped in front of her. "That night with Dylan, I said you were with me before I had any right to know whether that was true." Leah's smile faded just enough that I realized she thought I might be retreating again. "Evan, I'm not taking it back." She went still. "I'm fixing the order." That brought the faintest curve back to her mouth. I took the coffee from her hand and set both cups on the little table beneath the mailboxes because I wanted my hands free, and because apparently my brain still appreciated practical details during emotional emergencies. I said it first and asked questions afterward. Then you spent the next 2 weeks giving me answers I kept pretending needed independent verification. Leah folded her arms. There were spreadsheets planned. Several. Color-coded? Obviously. Her laugh came out quietly. but I did not let the joke become another exit. You were clear, I was slow. Her eyes stayed on mine. I could have told her everything I had figured out about myself over the past week, but most of it had already been demonstrated badly enough, so I kept it simple. I don't want you to be my girlfriend because Dylan came here. I don't want it because everyone in this building already assumes it. And I don't want to keep calling what we're doing dating, just because that lets me avoid asking for something more specific. Leah's arms loosened. That sounds dangerously close to an actual sentence. I've been practicing, I can tell. I stepped closer. Leah Carter, will you be my girlfriend? For once, she did not answer immediately. She looked at me for maybe 3 seconds, which felt like an unreasonable amount of time, considering how much grief she had given me about hesitation. Then she reached for my hand. Her fingers slid between mine exactly where we had first stood beside each other in front of Dylan. You know, she said. You made this much harder than it needed to be. I know. And you're probably going to keep overthinking things. Almost certainly. And occasionally I'm going to expect you to understand a joke was actually a serious statement. That seems unfair. Life is brutal. I smiled. Is there an answer hiding in here somewhere? Leah stepped closer until there was almost no space left between us. Yes. Her thumb moved once against my hand. I'll be your girlfriend. That should have been enough to satisfy me. Instead, because I had apparently developed some respect for procedure, I asked, Can I kiss my girlfriend? Leah stared at me. You have become unbearable. That's not a no. She caught the front of my jacket and pulled me the last few inches toward her. The kiss was different from the first one at the market. That one had answered whether we wanted each other. This one felt like an answer to what we were actually going to do about it. There was no audience, no ex, no neighbor watching through the glass, and no convenient excuse waiting afterward. When we separated, Leah stayed close and murmured, For future reference, you don't need to ask every single time. I appreciate the policy update. I knew you would. We did not celebrate by making some grand plan. We picked up our coffee before it got cold, took the elevator upstairs, and spent the rest of the evening at Leah's apartment arguing about which terrible movie deserved to be watched first. That felt appropriate. The whole point was not that our lives suddenly became dramatic once we defined the relationship. It was that all the ordinary things we had already been doing finally belonged to something neither of us was pretending not to recognize. Leah still stole food off my plate. I still corrected her when she claimed 7:30 meant around 8. She still thought my need for precise language was hilarious. And I still suspected half her vague wording was designed specifically to annoy me. A few days later, we were leaving the building together when Mrs. Delgado caught us near the front door. She looked at our joined hands and smiled. So, Leah, you with Evan now? The question was harmless, but I felt Leah glance at me. A month earlier, I probably would have answered before realizing I was doing it. This time I kept my mouth shut. Leah squeezed my hand and said, Yes. Then she looked up at me. He finally learned to ask first. Mrs. Delgado laughed. I sighed. And she finally stopped making me pass oral exams about terminology. I did no such thing. You absolutely did. Leah leaned into my shoulder as we walked outside. Still worth it, she asked. I looked at her. Unfortunately, she smiled. Good answer. Looking back, the strange thing was that Leah had never needed me to save her or decode some impossible set of signals. She had made her own decisions clearly enough. What I had needed to learn was the difference between respecting someone's choice and refusing to make one of my own until there was no risk left. The first time I said, She's with me, I was trying to get another man to back off. The time that mattered was when I finally gave Leah the chance to say whether she wanted the words to be true.
The entire relationship between Evan and Leah begins with one sentence that is technically wrong and emotionally revealing. Evan tells Dylan that Leah is with him because he wants her ex to stop blocking the conversation and let her leave. Leah could have corrected him immediately. Instead, she steps closer and tells him not to make her correct him, turning a protective improvisation into a possibility neither of them can comfortably ignore. What follows is not really about Dylan at all, even though Evan keeps trying to use him as an explanation. Leah invites Evan for coffee, brings him food, saves him a seat, lets a barista call him her boyfriend, and eventually agrees to spend Saturday at the market with him. Every time Evan wonders whether she is only doing it because of her ex, Leah pushes back on the same point. Dylan does not get ownership over the choices she makes after the breakup. She is spending time with Evan because she wants to, and she expects him to treat those choices as hers. The market finally removes most of the ambiguity. Leah takes his hand after the crowd is cleared, tells him she wants the outing to be a date, admits she was interested before the lobby incident, and says yes when he asks to kiss her. Evan gets the clear answer he has been waiting for, but then makes another mistake. When a neighbor asks whether they are official, he retreats into the safer phrase that they are seeing where things go. Leah does not demand a label. What bothers her is that she has been carrying almost every bit of momentum while Evan keeps asking for more certainty, so she stops. No punishment, no cold shoulder, no manipulation. She simply quits creating the next opening for him. That changes Evan faster than another flirtatious hint ever could. He realizes Leah has already said what she wants, and that his refusal to act is no longer caution. It is a way of avoiding his own risk. He begins asking her to dinner, initiating coffee, reaching for her hand first, and saying plainly that they are dating. The final correction happens back in the same lobby where the story started. This time there is no Dylan, no audience, and no pressure. Evan tells Leah that the first "she's with me" came before he had earned the answer, so he wants to fix the order. He asks her to be his girlfriend, and Leah gets to choose the words for herself. The sentence that began as a tactic finally becomes true because both of them agree to it. What makes Leah interesting here is that she is never waiting for Evan to rescue her. Even in the first scene, she has already ended the relationship with Dylan and is telling him to leave. Evan helps by making the situation easier, but Leah is still the person setting the boundary. That same pattern continues romantically. She is direct about what she wants, yet she eventually refuses to keep doing Evan's half of the emotional work. That distinction is important. Wanting clarity is reasonable, especially after a beginning that could easily have been misread. But there is a point where asking for endless proof stops being respectful and starts protecting the person asking from having to risk rejection. Leah recognizes that before Evan does. Her decision to stop leaving breadcrumbs is effective precisely because she does not threaten him or withdraw affection. She simply makes him responsible for his own choices. The strongest moment for me is not the first kiss or even the girlfriend question. It is Evan realizing that consent and initiative are connected but not identical. Leah can make her interest clear, but he still has to decide whether he is willing to step forward. Once he does, the relationship becomes much more balanced. Leah gave Evan plenty of signals, but she eventually stopped doing all the advancing for him. Which part do you think mattered most? Her refusing to let Dylan define her choices, the moment she stopped leaving openings, or Evan finally asking the question properly in the lobby? Drop your read on their dynamic in the comments. If you enjoyed the story, a like and subscription helps you catch the next one.